Howdy, y'all. So in the last video, we had created this spiral. And sorry, I had to go play tennis with my daughter. Lots of fun was had. And thanks for taking that break with me. So what was left to do was build this slider. Right now, we're just getting this message, hi from slider. And if you didn't watch that first video or whatever, you're just coming to this, you can go to this GitHub repo that I linked in the description and go to end video 1 and download that code, or you can clone this repo and check out this branch if you want to start where we are now. There was one thing I kind of glossed over at the end. I was kind of trying to rush to get out of here, and that was just this formula here to generate the rainbow. It's a pretty neat idea, and I linked the article in the description. He'll do a much better job explaining this. But a key thing I want to point out is just this use, the way we're able to structure our code like this in small functions. And I adapted these functions just a little bit. You'll see they're a little bit different, but not much. But these small reusable functions can actually really increase your productivity. I can turn these into a little library, and I think that's what I'm going to do first things here is just go to my source, and I'm going to add another file called utils, and I'm going to take this range function, assign to hex, and even generate points. And I'm going to take it all out of here. So this is just going to be spiral. And then I'm going to import them from let's see, and that's going to need to go out one layer. And we'll go to utils. And there's not anything there right now, but we'll paste this in here. And I'll clean this up a little bit, get rid of that original spiral function. And we'll say export const generate points and export const, oops, that's already being exported. Export const generate rainbow. And in here, we can just say, I think that's all we need to do. So now it says generate points and generate rainbow are not defined in spiral. And in here, I'll just import generate points and generate rainbow. And now, let's see, something went wrong here. Generate points is not defined. Yeah, it is. I just had to refresh my browser. Okay, so now those are in a separate utilities file. Very good practice, I think, because now also if I come back at some point in the future and I'm like, where was that function? I don't have to search through all these components. I can just know that I have been keeping track of stuff, and if I need sign to hex, I can pull it out of here and copy it into whatever other project I'm working on at the time. So we've got our spiral. Looks pretty good. The next and last thing we need to do is just add this slider. And that's actually, you know, really the sort of reactive thing in play here, right? So let's go to app and see we've got our slider, and we need to make that. So maybe I'll go to slider, and let's just think about what we need to have in slider. So slider, maybe I'll also make some CSS for this. And we'll just say slider.css. Now, I could make a separate folder for these. There's a bunch of different ways people have of organizing the relationship between the JavaScript and the CSS in React files. Sometimes people will declare it in the JavaScript itself. There's a number of different approaches to that as well. None of these things are really super well settled right now. But I'm just going to do it in this file. This is a pretty small project. And I'm not too worried about it. And, you know, I kind of like vanilla CSS. So we can just write CSS in this CSS file here. Now, we'll get rid of this div. And what we're going to want to return from here. Actually, you know what? We're going to need that div. Let's make a div with a class name of slider container. And inside of that container, we'll need a label. And we'll need a input. And actually, let's just do it like this. All right, and let's think about what this input's gonna do. So we'll say class name for this can be, I'm gonna call it slider input. And so it's gonna have a name, and it's gonna have a type. We'll set that to, sorry. Set that to range, hard code that. We'll give it a min. And let's just go ahead and assign this to name. I don't think it likes me doing that, but I don't think it's going to break anything. Max val. We'll say step equals 1. So we'll have a min val and a max val and a name that we're going to bring in, and we'll have this value. So that'll be the value of the slider. And then we'll have an onChange. And so now when the slider changes, we're going to call a function. And we'll come back to that, because that's a little bit tricky and kind of important. And actually, you know what? We'll just do it right now. So this is we're gonna call this update parent. And this is I think a great, what do you call these? Design pattern in React, where we'll pass in to this function, stateless functional component. We'll pass in a function as update parent. So it's the parent of this slider is the app, and this function is gonna be passed in up here from the parent. So it'll be a method on the app. We'll pass it into the slider, and when this onChange value gets called, it'll actually run this function inside of the parent. And we'll pass in to this, we'll pass in the event. And then into update parent, we'll pass this value name. And we'll pass e.target.value, just like you would in regular old JavaScript, right? So now we need that name. That's also going to come from the app. We need min val, max val, and we need value. So value is going to come from above in a way, right? And it's going to come from the state of the app. So this is really the state management that React is great at, where we can have this value is going to get this slider is going to update the parent. It's going to keep track of value as it changes on the actual slider. And then the parent app will send that back in to the slider and update the value. Neat, huh? And that's really good. That's really good for keeping things tidy. And then what we can do is we can say in here, we'll say name. And so this will just be that label off to the side. And then next to that, we'll have a span. And that span, inside of that span, we'll put some more JavaScript. It's just going to be value. And this span, let's give this a class name just to give it a color. I could also just do this right here inline as an inline style, but I'm just going to, in case we want to add some more styling at some point. And now this will say, this will be HTML for name, and this will give a class name too. So that'll be the label. I think that's it for the slider. Right, we've got name, min val, max val, value, and update parent coming in. This is a super now reconfigurable component. If I want to make another slider with different, input parameters, I just give it a different name, different min val, different max val, different value, and different update parent function. Make sense? All right, let's do now an app. Let's wire it in. So the slider is not going to need num circles, as it turns out. That's not what that was. I was kind of forgetting. What that is value, right? So let me just go back, and I'm not super smart. I forget these things. I'm just going to copy this list of things into the app here in slider. All right, so now we'll say name equals name, min val equals min val, max val equals max val, value equals value, update parent equals, and now in the parent, we're not going to call it update parent. We're going to call it instead this dot update num circles. Yeah. Okay. Good. So a lot of problems now. These things aren't defined, et cetera, et cetera. And I think I maybe actually kind of goofed here because name we can hard code in. So let's do that. Name is going to be num circles, min val. Let's just hard code this to, let's just say 10. So this will be the minimum number of circles. Max val, maximum number of circles. I want to say 1,000. Value is something we need, and you know what? We gotta get rid of these two. Get rid of these commas. Value is going to be a thing. Actually, that is going to be num circles. And update parent, this dot update num circles. So we'll do that here. And we'll call that update num circles. And if you watched my videos on higher order functions and arrow functions, you can probably see right away a great use for an arrow function. When we call this dot update num circles, we're not calling it here in the app. we're sending it in to another context. And we're going to call that in here. And then it's going to be happening in onChange, so it's going to be in yet a different context, right? This function is getting passed around like a hot potato. And we are wrapping it here in an immediately invoked function expression. So that may, let's just see, let's test it out. We might want to make this an arrow function, and generally I would, but I'm not entirely sure what's going to happen if I do this. I'm just going to say updating. Oops. And then we'll have num circles. We've got num circles at 720. Let's just see what we get here. We did compile successfully. And now we've got a slider. And we can see we're updating just fine. Now my value's not updating. And the reason for that is pretty simple. Here in update num circles, I need to take in, actually what we're going to do is keep this modular. And you know what? Let's just change this. That was silly. We just want to say, let's just say update. Let's call it update. And in here, what we can do is bring in prop and value. Let's go back and look at slider. Make sure, yeah, we're bringing in a name and a value. So this value is going to be a number, and this is going to be this name here. And we'll bring those into this function here. And we can log those out, prop and value. And here we go. So now we're getting what we wanted. So we didn't need to wrap that in an arrow function because, or we need to make that an arrow function because it's being invoked by an arrow function, which will maintain its context. So we're getting there. We got num circles is the name, and the number is the value of this slider. Now we need to send this back into my slider so that my slider will reflect the changes. You see how it's like the slider's staying at 720 and the value is staying at 720. So what I need is to get here in my render method, I need to have this num circles value change. We're bringing in num circles from this dot state. What I need to do is in here, I need to update state, right? And so React provides you with a function to do this. And the reason why we have to use this function is because we don't want to mutate this state. It's a very important principle from functional programming. We don't say this dot state equals a new object. We don't ever do that. That is very, very bad practice. Instead, we call this dot set state, which is going to actually create a new copy of state for us, and it'll add whatever I send into this function. It'll add it in. It'll concatenate it with my state. So all I have to do here is say prop, and that is gonna add into state. It's gonna add this num circles, and then we'll pass in here value, and we can actually make sure that's gonna be a number. And let's take a look. So now, cannot read property set state of undefined. Okay, so now, my bad. This is exactly why we need an arrow function. Because, and that was just me being silly. Of course, it was working to send the data in, but now that we're in our app context, this is no longer a thing. There's no this out where we are. And so what we need to do is instead make this an arrow function. So we'll say update. And magically now that we brought in an arrow function, it works. So a very important thing to remember when, working with React or any kind of functional programming context is you want to keep track of when you need to use an arrow function. And if you're getting an error like that, this is undefined, you probably want to use an arrow function. So that's nice. I got my spiral is changing its number of circles all the way down to 10, up to 1,000. I think I'm going to change the opacity and make the opacity a little lower even. So I'm going to do that in circle component, and I'm going to say 2. And there we go. So that's a little hazier. We could even do something like this math.random. Right? We can set that with JavaScript. So now each circle is going to have a different opacity. Looks kind of whack. Let me see. As it gets lower, each one maintains that random opacity. But if I were to refresh the browser, we get a whole different set of random opacities. I think that stinks. I'm just going to go back to like 4. All right, so now we've got this opacity. We got our circles. Our numbers are updating. Our slider looks dumb. And with SVG, we can make really neat looking slider, but I'm not going to do that right now because I want to go eat dinner. So we're just going to do some quick CSS to this thing to make it look a little bit better and call it a day. So I'm going to go back into, let's see, slider.css. Actually, first, let's go back into, let's see, I think we've got that. Yeah, oh, it's all in slider. Okay, so now what we need to do is slider container, label, and slider input. And let's do, first of all, where are we? Let's do slider container. And slider container, let's make it flex. Let's give it margin. I'm going to go ahead and give it a margin bottom in case I want to add another slider later. And I'm going to justify content to the center. And let's look at what that does, right? It just moves it to the center. Next thing I want to do is, I think I'm going to change the color of these guys and change the styling of this quite a bit. So what was the next one? What was that? Label. Label and white. So first I'll just do white because that's easy. And that's going to be color white. Since this is just one, maybe what I'll do instead is mix these up a little bit. And we'll just say style equals color white. So here we've got our style tag. This outermost curly brace denotes this is going to be JavaScript, and then we pass in an object that has a color value. And we can style everything here. And that is definitely one pattern that is accepted with React. Maybe we'll also style the label. I mean, the label's got, let's see, so instead of this, actually I think I'll just keep this in the CSS. So we don't need that. We'll just say label. And the label, we're going to say color black. Let's give it display inline block. And we'll say margin right. And give it like 20 pixels maybe, just to get a little bit of space on that, on the left or the right side. Yeah, so now let's take a look. Cool. So we've got now, I just want to make that white just so it sort of stands out a little bit. And maybe we'll go add this to our slider. Name. Oh, whoops. I want that to be black. Maybe that's just not necessary. It's not worth it to me to go through the trouble of adding that semicolon or colon. And then we're going to style the slider input. Back to the CSS, and we'll say slider input. And let's see, so I'm going to say vertical line middle. And let's give it a little padding. Just half a rem. And some padding bottom. We'll say color red. And give it a background color gray. And I'm going to give it a little box shadow. Just a little. RGBA 0, 0, 0, not 0. Whole reason I'm doing this is so I can give it a little bit of color with a low opacity. And let's make this significantly wider than it was, so you can really kind of see what's happening. And then I'm going to say WebKit appearance none. And so the other really important thing to me is I want to go slider input, and we'll go focus when it's being focused, outline none, because I just hate that default sort of white with the blue background. So now we're kind of getting somewhere, right? We got this grayish background. I like that better personally. We still have this blue dot. We could do a lot of different things with this blue dot, but I'm just going to turn it into a kind of a rectangle. And that thing is going to be called so this will be slider inputs. And we want to target the WebKit slider thumb. Now, there's a lot else we could do in here? For touch screens and all kinds of variations between browsers, but this isn't really a course and that kind of thing. Not even a course. Not even a course. This is just a video for people to help practicing with React. And let's see. You know what? Let's change this to rems. And we'll give it a height 1.5 rems. And maybe, let's say, cursor pointer. Always a good idea. And let's say margin top. Yeah, I like that. Actually, not. Again, I keep forgetting. I'm trying to use rems more. Make it just a little bit roundy. And let's give it a different color. So it won't be blue. It's going to be black. And again, WebKit appearance, none. Let's see what we got. Oh, cursor pointer is wrong. Thank you. All right, what do we got? Oh, I did something wrong. What did I do wrong? Oh. Oh, still not right. There we go. All right. I don't like that height. That height is no good. What did I do there? Let's see. Oh, right. Yeah, that's it. What I want this to do is kind of expand beyond. So let's see if that does it. It's better. Oh, we do the margin bottom. There we go. Maybe that's one way. That's a look. I'll make this a little taller. Height, 1 point. Yeah, I like that a little better. I think that's it, people, for now. So, a couple of things that I could recommend here for you, and one would be see if you can add a couple more sliders. You've already got A and B here, and circle size scalar. Try adding 3 more sliders for those values in here, and see if you can make that happen. Remember, we're bringing in num circles, circle size scalar, and A and B from state. And you just have to update state in here and actually update. This update function should handle any name you want to throw at it. So see if you can make that happen to make this more interesting. And then, something I think maybe I'll come back and do at a later date, maybe even next week, is right here we've got this spiral formula drawing circles. But since this is React, why don't I make this even more reactive by adding a couple more options here? We could have a spiral formula, we could have a cardioid formula, we could have a circle formula, we could have, I don't know, butterfly formula or something. We could have a bunch of different formulas, and you just click it, and each one of these will go to those presets, or we could create presets, right? We could even give people the ability to store presets that they like. We could make this sort of geometric drawing thing a lot more dynamic, and that might be fun to try. But for now, have fun out there, and drop me a comment if you have any questions or if you enjoyed this. And if you leave me that comment, I'll be sure to make another one for you.